Senator, let me ask you first. Republicans controlled the White House, controlled the House, controlled the Senate just 5 years ago. And during that time, spending went up, deficits went up, federal government grew. What assurances are there that the new Republicans, this new Republican majority, are actually going to pay attention to those issues? And is there added pressure here from within the Republican Party that these cuts and spending decreases actually happen?
Well, first of all, I think there is a renewed interest among Republicans and Democrats to look at the fiscal situation differently because it's totally out of control now. When I was budget director last, which was 4 years ago, the deficit was about 1.2% of our economy. Today it's about 10% of our economy. So it's gone from 160 billion to 1.6, 10 times increase. So yeah, there were deficits back then, but they were manageable deficits. Now we're looking at a situation that is truly scary for our kids and our grandkids and affecting our economy today. So this is why we need to get it under control, and this is why I saw the comments there about disrespectful and rude. We need to be civil about it, but we need to have an honest debate over the future of our country. If we don't begin to get this spending under control at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, we're going to either have a lot more borrowing, and it'll affect the economy in significant ways, or huge new tax increases. So we have to figure out ways in a smart way to do more with less and to have leaner, more efficient government.
Senator, moderates are not very popular within the Republican Party. Republicans across the country focus on Senator Snowe as an example, and Collins and others who are viewed as moderates. Can you have a civil tone, particularly within the Republican caucus? I mean, from an outsider looking in, it seems like everything is one side or the other, and there isn't a lot of room for that civil point of view.
Sure, you can have a civil tone, and you can have a civil tone whether you're a conservative, and I'm a fiscal conservative, or whether you're a moderate, or whether you're a liberal. And you can have it because it's the right thing to do to make the country better. We've got to focus on results. Too often in Washington, the issue is partisan advantage and not what's best for the American people and what's best for the taxpayer.
Real quick, the headline of this week has been Libya, and I think there's a lot of confusion. Both parties, most Americans. In 1986, Ronald Reagan bombed Libya in an attempt to get Gaddafi. In 2008, the Bush administration recognized him. John McCain went there, shook his hand, and commended him for peacekeeping in Africa. And now, 18 months later, we see the Obama administration once again bombing Libya. Is there a consensus of where we're at and where we're going? And this is not just a Republican-Democrat issue. This is a foreign policy question. Do we know what we're doing in Libya?
I'm concerned about the actions we've taken in Libya. Look, no one likes this guy. Everybody wants him out. The Arab League, representing the other Arab countries, have spoken. They'd like him out. Certainly France and the UK have been aggressive in their point of view. My question is, what should the American role be? And I think the President has not laid out the objectives. The President has also not laid out how you would measure whether we're successful in meeting those objectives. And finally, we don't know what our exit plan is. So we talked about the fiscal situation a minute ago. You know, we face record deficits this year. We face a debt of over $14 trillion. We've never seen this before in our country. We've got huge problems, and yet we are going into Libya without clear objectives, and it's an expensive war. You know, every one of those cruise missiles that's being launched is being launched with a credit card. 42 cents of every dollar we're spending now at the federal government level is borrowed money. So I think we need to be very cautious, and I'm concerned about the actions we've taken without having, again, the proper objectives laid out and a way to measure success.
Very quickly, did the Bush administration make a mistake in re-recognizing him or forgiving him of any lawsuits regarding terrorists a few years ago?
Well, my recollection was that was all about him saying that he would, as opposed to Saddam Hussein, who did not, forsake weapons of mass destruction, so that he would give up his weapons program, chemical weapons program. I think he had a biological weapon program at the time, and stop any progress toward a nuclear weapons program. So that was a good thing that he did. It doesn't, though, excuse the kind of activities we've seen over the last several weeks as he has used his own military against his own people. And you know, he's a dictator who, again, everyone would like to see out. The question is, what should the U.S. role be?
Senator, you talk about out-of-control spending. Some of what's gotten the media attention lately, outside of the temporary spending packages that are keeping the government open, or we're talking about things like defunding NPR. I mean, and these are things that have ultimately have little effect on the budget and the deficit. We're talking about small dollar things here. What is out of control in the government spending right now? Specifically, you know the budget very well. What is out of control, and why is there continue to be criticism that neither party seems to be attacking some of the big spending items, Medicaid, Medicare, defense, Social Security?
Jim, you raise a great question, and my view is everything needs to be on the table and under the microscope. And that includes the spending that's being discussed over the next couple of weeks here in Congress, which is the continuing resolution spending, which is a relatively small part of the budget. You're right, it's about 12% of the budget. We also need to talk about the defense spending. We need to talk about the entitlement programs, incredibly important programs for our seniors with regard to Medicare and Social Security, for lower-income Americans with regard to Medicaid. But these are programs that are not sustainable on their current footing. In other words, they have such big unfunded obligations over time that we got to be sure and reform them and improve them in order to save them. When you add up the entitlement programs together with interest on the debt, it's about 62% of the budget this year. So that is the biggest part of the budget, and it is the fastest growing part of the budget. This is one reason, by the way, we need to get at the health care issue. And unfortunately, here we are a year after the health care bill is passed, and we find that costs are increasing in health care, not decreasing, which affects all of us as families, affects small businesses, but also affects the federal budget deficit because that drives these big increases in Medicare and Medicaid.
Can you give us an entitlement reform you would support that would make these programs more sustainable?
Well, one thing that I've proposed previously, and I think it's an important thing to do, is to put more means testing into the entitlement programs. This is something that both Democrats and Republicans have had difficulty with over the years politically. You know, it's a tough thing to support sometimes, but frankly, we're in a situation now, given our incredibly large deficits, which are at record levels, these debts that, again, we've never seen in the history of our country and are impacting our economy already and impacting jobs, that we need to take tough measures. And that will include, again, smart reforms of these programs, as well as looking at everything in terms of the annual spending, which is what's being talked about in Congress this week and next week.
At what point do you think we'll see some action on these big ticket items? You know, they've been talked about forever, but there just doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite from the president on down to really do something about it.
Well, Mark, I think it's likely we'll see it over the next few months because the president is going to come to Congress and say that he'd like to increase the debt limit. Right now, there's a statutory debt limit as to how much the United States can borrow. Our debt, as I said, is over $14 trillion now. I mean, we've never seen these kinds of levels before. So he needs to get approval from Congress to be able to borrow more money. I said earlier, about 42 cents of every dollar that's spent at the federal level is now borrowed. And by the way, about half of that borrowing is from either foreign governments or foreign controlled companies. So when you look at the situation right now, if the president's going to ask for an increase in the debt limit, I think it's fair that those of us who are fiscal conservatives in Congress say, okay, but what are you going to do and what are we going to do as a country to get these debts under control so that we don't have to continue to come back year after year to Congress to raise the debt ceiling and to mortgage the future for our kids and our grandkids. And that's, I think, the opportunity for us with some leverage to come up with some sensible solutions on some of these issues. You recall that the president convened a fiscal commission that he appointed himself. They reported in December. They made some very significant suggestions with regard to the entitlement programs that Jim and I just talked about, but also with regard to defense spending, with regard to the annual spending that's being talked about in Congress this week and next week. And they also talked about the need for us to improve the economy, because if you don't get the economy back on track, particularly in states like Ohio, where we have over 9% unemployment, it's tough to get the fiscal situation under control. And that included tax reform. The president chose to ignore those recommendations from his own fiscal commission. But those recommendations are out there, and a lot of us in Congress are looking at those. I sent a letter to the president, along with Republicans and Democrats alike, last week, saying that the president ought to come forward and engage with us in a discussion about those fiscal commission recommendations in the context particularly of asking us to increase the debt limit.
Senator, we're literally down to the last 30 seconds, but there is no question, I think, on anybody's mind that you will be on a short list for vice president, whoever the Republican nominee is next year. So without giving us I'm concentrating on my duties as senator, give us a little news here. Have you thought about a national campaign, and can Barack Obama be defeated?
I haven't thought about it, and I'm focused on Ohio. I mean, I just spent 22 months in a campaign that you covered very well, Jim, hoping to have the honor to represent our great state at a time where we have huge issues we've just talked about here today. So that's my entire focus. I haven't thought about it for 1 second. Is President Obama beatable? Of course. Look, this is politics. Anything can happen. And
especially if you're on the ticket?
No, it's not about me at all. It's about the fact that here in Ohio, there will be a lot of focus because the road to the White House goes through
Always comes
Ohio.
through here.
And when you look at, you know, the math on the Electoral College, again, Ohio will be front and center.
Good to see you.
Thanks, Jim.
Senator, thank you so much. All right. When we come back.